Alright, welcome back. I said I was going to get a new marker. I haven't yet. This might be legible. I don't know if it is. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't. None of this matters. None of this matters. So today's video is about the core. Last video was about accessory movements, and you can consider, I would consider core movements or, the like to be accessory movements that are there to assist, your main overall movement patterns. I feel the need to single this one out more so than any other muscle group for various reasons. One, particularly just because I would say 50% of clients that have come in that I've seen have had that be a goal of theirs in one way or the other. And you can sort of do a lot to unpack that and try and look for reasonings why people are so focused on it. And there's a number of different reasons why someone would be focused on the core outside of, like the main functionality of how does it help all of your other overall lifts and whatnot. But there's a number of reasons why anyone would do anything, but the two that I can sort of branch off and talk about are aesthetics, one, and like functionality, two. And one of the bigger misconceptions people have around functionality is someone just tells them, like, you need to work on your core, like it's some sort of special muscle group that's just the essence of your entire being. The core is where your soul resides, and on a moral standard, you need to focus on just down here, because once you get this good, everything else will be good. You'll have giant arms, and your bench press will go up 400 pounds, and everything will be good. You'll be happy. You won't be depressed anymore. You'll stop eating bad once your core musculature is finally just in tune with the cosmos that lie beyond this world or the next. Which is an interesting point. One, just do me a favor, stand up, use good posture if you can, if you have it. Stand up. Are you standing good? Is the musculature surrounding your spine supporting your spine, and are you standing upright? Good. So your core is working. The degree to whether or not it's strong enough is, it's strong enough because you're standing upright, you're sitting upright, right? That's baseline level. If you're hunched over like this, yeah, you got some issues. If you have back pain, you might have some issues. But for most people, your core is fine. Stop worrying about it. Don't worry about that, and don't single that out. Like I believe Jim Wendler says, the issue isn't your weaknesses, the issue is that you are weak, and that's not to point at you out in internet land and say you're weak, but everything needs attention, right? That's why I use those archetypical patterns to point at. This will cover most of your stuff, but get some extra work and stuff like that, but at its base it should cover most muscle groups. And this is where you sort of start filling in the blanks with that. But yeah, you don't just need to make your core stronger. You need your legs and your arms and your chest and your back and your neck and everything else. It's a holistic thing, right? So don't only just focus on the core. That's not thing number two, or thing number one in this example would be aesthetics, which for most people, that's just, I want six-pack abs, which correlation and causation sort of thing. You can have a six-pack and can have a strong core, or you can just be, shredded down to 10 to 12% body fat, and you can just have a visible six-pack. But it doesn't mean that, Bane can't lift you over his head and break your back like he broke Batman's back. It doesn't mean that can't still happen to you. So keep that in mind. keep that in mind. Keep that in mind that Bane is always lurking around corners with that mask on, which, we were all making fun of him for the mask, but now look at him. He's, we're all, masks and ventilators and stuff like that are all in low supply in America right now. Bane's been wearing one this whole time. Watch him. He's gonna pick you up over his head and break your back because you're at a low percent body fat. And he doesn't like that. He's pretty beefy. What the fuck am I talking about? Core. So yeah, sort of realize that those are two different sort of distinguishable concerns that a lot of people have for aesthetics. Yeah, you want to build up some musculature, but you also want to be at a low body fat percentage. Anybody's going to tell you that, unless you're like Eddie Hall, who is a big, fat, giant, well, not anymore, but I mean, he's still giant. A big, giant, strong man with just like a giant gut and then just a visible six-pack over his gut, which is amazing. That's one day what I hope to look like. No. But, yeah, so core movements. Due to these misunderstandings in how to train the core, or why you would train the core, there's a lot of misconception around how you would train the core, right? So what I'll notice is a lot of aerobics classes, a lot of workout DVDs, a lot of hip hop abs, a lot of, I don't know, Orange Theory type stuff, a lot of whatever, when you go to do an abs class, let's say, what are you doing? Is you're doing 100 different exercises that you know, none of the names of, and how many reps are you doing them for? Are you counting reps, or are they just saying, hey, do 5 minutes worth of bicycles, and you're just back and forth doing bicycles, and it hurts, and they say, oh, go past the pain, and you do it for more, and you're like, my stomach really hurts, and they're like, yeah, but keep going, and you do more, and you do more, and you hit 100, and you're like, oh, that was a good ab workout. Now I can stand up stronger, and I have better posture. No, you don't train any other muscle group like that, really, I mean, depending. Right now I'm doing, like, bicep curls with a 5-pound weight for like 3 sets of 30. I mean, I don't have a heavier weight, so that's all I can do. But, or if you're in the army, you're doing a lot of push-ups, you're doing a lot of pull-ups, you're running, you can consider to be a voluminous exercise, but that's cardio, right? And that's not to say that some level of cardio or conditioning or high volume work can't contribute to your strength, but when you talk about strength in general, strength is sort of like, I mean, depending on your definition, which can be broad in a lot of different senses, but let's just consider strength as just pure force output, right? How much your muscles are firing up to move a certain load, a certain distance over a certain period of time, which I think is actually power, so minus the time. But just, yeah, how much weight you can lift, or how much you can push, or anything like that. Like when you break it down into those specific variables, right? Like that's what a 1 rep max test is a test of your pure strength. You don't build strength by doing a bunch of 1 rep maxes, but that's how you test it. And maybe this is sort of a tangent that doesn't tangent all the way back around to the tan, but nonetheless, so when you see a lot of people that are just like, oh, I do 200 crunches a day, which Arnold did 200 crunches a day. So I'm not saying that it's bad to do 200 crunches a day. Obviously, it worked for the guy that's the most famous bodybuilder. But all I'm trying to say is that if a certain thing, if you're doing it and it's not working for you, you need to take one, maybe a little more of a holistic approach, regarding like dieting and stuff like that, because, if you read if you read this goddamn book, it's not only, hey, do 200 crunches and all your problems are solved. He has an entire section about diet towards the back, and he has other exercises and stuff like that. So one, always keep the bigger picture in mind. Two, sort of take maybe a different approach towards it, and that's sort of what I'm going to get at here. This is, for all intents and purposes, this is how I train core. This is how I train my soul, basically. And this is how I have other clients train their core. And maybe not everybody does it. This is based on things that I've read that made a lot of sense in my brain, that have been, sort of reiterated by people who I know and that I trust and whose knowledge I seek out on a regular basis, that I work with, or people who, people whose videos you watch, or people who you sort of trust and highly regard and stuff like that. It doesn't, like everything else, there's 100 different ways to skin a cat, right? But the way that I break these down, and this will help in a lot of different ways, because like I was mentioning before with the 100 different exercises, how do you know which one to do and why you should do it, and that it's working what you think that it's going to work, and how you program it, how many reps to do, blah, 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 blah. So this, I'm all about breaking things down into comprehensive, followable things that are just like the bare minimum, and always start with the bare minimum, and then if you want to add more onto it, if you want to do some of these things, and then you want to toss in, 200 crunches a day on top of some of this stuff, like, go for it. I don't care. If you don't want to do this stuff, I don't care either. But if this is of some assistance to you, then try it out. No reason not to. Core movement patterns. Core movement patterns. Flexion is like movement in, like, the flexion would be the shortening of a muscle, right? So if you're flexing, flex inward, right? So for the spine or for the core, that would be flexion downward, sort of like you're doing a sit up or whatnot, a sit up, or you're sitting on a couch lazily, flexion. Extension, which is the lengthening of a muscle, so extension of the elbow joint would be this way. So for your spine, extension would be, this is going more into hyperextension, but just think of extension as being the opposite of flexion, right? So you flex forward, you extend backwards. I would argue how I'm standing right now is like neutral. Extension would be this way. Lateral flexion. So lateral flexion being you flex to one side or the other. Obviously, since it's sort of a bilateral movement, you're both flexing and extending at the same time, depending on your point of reference of this is right side flexion, left side extension, left side flexion, right side extension. Doesn't matter, just lateral flexion, one side or the other. If you're going to do them, do both so that you get even work done, right? And rotation. So your spine, I don't know if you know this or not, but you can do this with it. My feet are planted in the ground, and I can do this. Look at me, Mom. No hands. Alright, it's raining, so maybe I should close my windows, but, yeah, fuck it. All these things into consideration. I'm not telling you to move like this. I'm not telling you not to move like this. This is how you move already, right? When I do most of my core work, I do the opposite of this, which is to say, you're resisting this. Because again, if you conceptualize the entirety of your core, not as some sort of spiritual, I don't know why nobody thinks that, nobody says that, that's just my over-exaggeration to make a broader point. But if you conceptualize it as being, Move this down just a little bit. If you conceptualize the core musculature as being something that's supposed to support the structural integrity of the spine, because the number one thing you don't want to do when you're lifting weights is you don't want to throw your back out, right? You don't want to slip a disc. You don't want to break your back. You don't want Bane to break your back. So the purpose, as far as I'm concerned, of the spine is to support. The purpose of the core is to support the spine. And how do you support the spine? Look at anybody who's doing a heavy deadlift, for instance, like let's say a 1,000-pound deadlift. Look at their low back. If their low back gives out, if they go from, sort of neutral, there's a lot of top lifters that round the upper back so that they shorten the range of motion, but their lower back, if their lower back starts to give in, they're going to fall forward. They're probably going to pop a disc or something like that. So how do you want to train that is you want to do the opposite of that motion. You want to train the stability of it. Same thing with a lot of things. You want to, let's say you're playing football or something like that, and you're running and you go to throw something and someone tackles you. You want the musculature of your core to keep you from just breaking in half, right? If someone tackles you as you're in this rotated position, you want the musculature to work to protect your spine so that they don't just pop. Maybe that's a thing that happens, but that's, why you have muscles that surround and support the spine is to resist movement. So the way that I approach core movement is by doing anti-movement. So anti-flexion, which is resisting flexion. You're trying to, I'll just go through these real fast, but then I'll give examples. You're trying to resist flexion. Anti-extension, which is resisting extension. Anti-lateral flexion, which is resisting the tendency for the spine to flex laterally. And anti-rotation, which is resisting rotational movement from the spine. Excuse me. And specific exercises that go along the lines of these. There's going to be a number of different ones, and there may be some that I may or may not list that utilize this to a certain degree, or don't utilize it but sort of use the same conceptualization, which is to say, one thing that I always recommend to people is go look up Dr. Stuart McGill's Big Three movements, which essentially boils down to an anti-flexion movement, an anti-lateral flexion movement, and an anti-extension movement, which his big three are like a modified curl up where your low back stays neutral and you are flexing the spine forward, but the low back stays neutral. A bird dog, which I would consider to be anti-extension, which is, you're on all fours, one arm goes out, one leg comes up, and you're resisting the spine to go into, lordosis, or is lordosis more of a function than you're resisting the hyperextension of the spine by keeping a neutral spine, right? Anti-lateral flexion, I believe he has you do side planks, I don't think, since it's Big Three, he's not including anti-rotational stuff, but insofar as I know, I think that I actually don't know if I've ever read him talk about anti-rotational movements, but that's on me, that's not on him. It's my own, we all have gaps in our knowledge, right? So for these, the way that I train these is, pick one of each. They don't have to be all done on the same day, right? Sometimes I'll do 2 and 2, or sometimes somebody doesn't, need something or doesn't want something, so I'll do 1 and 2, or just one predominantly. A lot of these, especially the first two, you can almost sort of conceptualize as being nearly one and the same, and not completely one and the same. But if you're familiar with, let's say, ab wheel rollouts, for instance, one of the exercises that's my client's favorite things is you take a wheel and you roll out with it, and you're both, one, resisting sort of the back, arching and rounding as you're doing it, but two, the tendency as you go further out is for the back to sort of, arch this way and go into hyperextension. So it's a little of both. You're not getting to the same degree. But where am I going with this? You're not getting to the same degree, but, for all intents and purposes, sometimes I'll just group these together within the same, depending on a number of things. Doesn't matter. But just to sort of know that these are the 4 categories. I gave you some examples. I'm going to give you some more examples. Anti-flexion exercises. One, like I said, some form of rollout, which also would be some form of rollout, some form of like walkout, anything like that, anything where the core has to stay neutral as you're going through a certain range of motion or something like that. Anything that keeps you from collapsing forward. Number 2, I already mentioned, would be more along the lines of, I think a real good example of this that's a little more of an advanced example, but it's good for the sake of sort of pointing out what I'm talking about, is look up dragon flags, which is the upper portion of your back is on the ground and you're anchored somewhere, and then your thoracic spine sort of allows your body to go downwards as your body's in a straight line. Bruce Lee, I believe, invented them, or at least coined them, or he has something to do with them. And you bring your legs down, your body's in a complete straight line, and you bring yourself back up. Again, the upper back's on the ground. That's a good example of anti-extension, because the tendency for that is to allow for extension to happen. So you're utilizing the core to keep that from happening. Other examples would be, I would argue, something like a dead bug, because again, your core is neutral. Your core is neutral. The tendency for that a lot of the time is for the with a dead bug, you're not too worried about like coming up too much. You're more worried about the spine arching underneath you. You want the spine to be completely flat against the ground, so you're resisting extension, right? Lateral flexion. A lot of times what I'll do for these, because if you remember, I had the 6 major compound movements that I use, and then some accessory movements which were along the lines of a lunge, a rotation, a carry. A lot of times I'll knock out 2 birds with 1 stone and do an anti-lateral flexion or extension exercise by doing like what's called a suitcase carry, which is literally you just have you have weight, you have 1 load in 1 hand and no weight in the other hand, and then you're trying to use the core to keep the weight from pulling you this way, while at the same time, you don't want to overextend and sort of, if the weight's here and you don't want to pull this way, you just want the spine to be completely neutral, straight up and down, like there's a fucking stick going through your back. You want your back to be like a friggin' stick, and you want the musculature of the core to surround that and keep it structurally sound as weight is pulling you on one side and then you switch sides. So that's how I tackle that. And anti-rotation, which is a complex thing to sort of wrap your head around, but look up an exercise called a Palloff press, which is basically, I don't know too many other examples of anti-rotational exercises, but that's basically my go-to one, which is you need some form of a band or some form of a cable to do these, and you take a handle, and all you're doing is you take a couple steps out, you're pressing forward, but the weight is pulling you this way. So if it's real heavy, the weight's going to pull you this way, and instead of doing that, you're just pressing forward, pulling back, pressing forward, not even pulling back, but allowing back, and that is keeping your core from rotating, because the weight again is pulling you this way, and you're going through this range of motion without the core and the spine moving you this way. So that's pretty much how I would break all of those down and why I would break them down. Again, you know, if you want to do some of these, if you got something out of this and you go, oh, that sounds like a cool new exercise, let me integrate that somehow. You know, look all of those up, see if you like any of them, integrate them in any which way you sort of want to. God, there's so much stuff. There's so much more stuff. Next video I might make. There's so much stuff. Next video I might make might be about breathing and bracing, because it's one thing about like core functionality and knowing like this is the movement pattern that you have to do, right? But how do you make sure that the core is being activated and utilized in the way other than just, oh, you know, pull your stomach in, right? Not right. And it's a thing that even a lot of clients that I have right now have a hard time. I have to constantly, you know, how's your breathing? When are you breathing? And they're like, I don't know. Breathing. So it's one, important because you need oxygen. And two, it's important because all this stuff that I'm talking about doesn't matter if you're not utilizing the core correctly. So that's going to be probably the next video. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add to that. I would like to get to some other stuff, but you know, these have somewhat turned into lectures around, you know, not just me saying, here, do this, but why you would do this. And so I hope that they're utilized in that way. I'll probably do if you follow me on Instagram, it's at gmfitness312. I'll probably do a video for each one of these so you know how to do them in your own home. So check that out, follow that. I'll do a series of videos where I'm just going through all of the motions so you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else. Like I was saying, these have turned into a little bit more of like a lecture series because I'm, you know, very self-conscious about, you know, not just that I want to put information out there, but I want to defend my rationalization about why I'm putting that information out there. And I'm hoping that it's, you know, making sort of the right ripples, you know, within the right people that need to know this information, because a lot of people haven't been explained this stuff in this sort of way before, you know, which is to say, like, you know, set forward a model and then sort of explain and defend the model and explain how to sort of tinker with it, or how to take things out, how to add things in, why you would want to do that, how to blah, 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 blah. So that's why I'm sort of taking a long time to put forth like a rational defense of everything that I'm doing, is because, you know, I do think that that's sort of missing from a lot of people's understanding as to why you would do anything in the first place. So that's why I'm doing all this stuff. And after I go through a couple more, I would like to get to maybe some more fun examples of like different things you can, do, different ways to implement different things, and things that are sort of outside the box, and things along those lines. But I think that the basis sort of you need to start with the basis of understanding like how all this sort of contributes to the whole, right, before you move on and do something different. Like, at least have an understanding of blah 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 blah. I'm going on too long. I wanted to do like a 10-minute video on this, and it's 30 minutes again, so oops.